I am reading the American Adventure series, Book 2, Plymouth Pioneers. Chapter 1. Captain Standish! 12-year-old John Smith raced down the deck of the Mayflower. Panting as much from excitement as running, he stopped before the red-faced, mean-looking man who had been chosen chief military officer for the new colony in America. John saluted smartly, even though his heart thudded against his ribs. "What do you want, Smith?" Standish gruffly demanded. "Can't you see I'm busy? The people are waiting to hear what our scouting party discovered. Step out of my way. I have to enlist volunteers for a longer exploration." The corners of the captain's mouth turned down. "I suppose it will have to be after the Sabbath. Anyway, we have to find a place for our permanent settlement. I don't have time to waste standing here talking to you." Standish waved his hand as if to brush John aside like a troublesome insect. Pale November sunlight shone on John's short brown hair and danced in his bright brown eyes. His heart pounded even harder, but he did not back down from the captain or his cold stare. "I know, sir. That's why I stopped you. I want to go with the exploring party." John kept his gaze steady without a single blink. "You?" Standish laughed unpleasantly. "I need men, not lads. Try again in a few years, if we survive that long in this godforsaken land." The corners of his mouth turned down. "We'll be lucky if any of us are alive by the end of next year." "Sir, I am almost 13, John persisted, even though refusal plainly showed in the captain's cold eyes. "I'm strong. I can also outrun every boy and most of the men on board ship." He flexed his right arm and grinned. Captain Standish planted his feet apart, his hands on his hips. He gave John a sour look, unconvinced. "You're a cocky one, aren't you? I thought you separatists were taught it's a sin to boast." "Is it boasting if you know you can do something well?" John asked. "I only told you because I thought you might need a swift runner to carry messages." A reluctant smile crossed the captain's hard face. He looked John over from the top of his head to the tips of his worn boots. You are tall for your age. Wiry, too." He hesitated and tilted his head to one side. "I might be able to use you at that." Standish drew his brows together in a ferocious scowl. "Very well. You may go if your father agrees, and he plans to volunteer." John clapped his hand over his mouth. How had he dared let his burning desire to go ashore make him interrupt? "Quiet, whelp!" Standish roared. "If you go, you are under my command. You will obey my orders, keep your mouth shut, and stay close to your father. Understand me?" "Yes, sir," John mumbled. His face felt hot. For the first time during the conversation, he shifted his gaze and stared at the deck. "Dismissed." The captain, shoulders back, spine straight, and stiff as a musket, marched toward the group of people eagerly awaiting his report. "Thank you, sir." John clapped one hand over his mouth, this time to hold back a whoop of glee. Now if father would only let him go. John followed Captain Standish. He pretended he was stalking a deer in the forest and stepped lightly so his footsteps would make no sound. When they reached the waiting crowd, the captain marched to the front of the little band. John squirmed his way in next to his father and an older edition of himself. Mother, an almost 7-year-old Sarah, stood with the women. Petite Sarah's green eyes looked enormous in her freckled face. Curly wisps from her dark brown braids peeked out from beneath the hood of her cloak. Mother also had green eyes, but her braids were wound on top of her head. She gave John a smile. John shuffled his feet uneasily. How would Mother feel about him going with the men? And Sarah! He rolled his eyes. Even though he gave his sister less to worry about now than when they were in Holland, Sarah was bound to tease him to stay behind. "Why worry about that?" he muttered, so low no one around him could hear. "First, I must get Father's permission." John remained silent, although he longed to clutch his father's arm and plead to be taken ashore with the other volunteers. He just had to go with the second scouting party. When the first band of 16 men set off in the longboat, John had ached to be one of them. It would be more than he could bear to be left behind again. Captain Standish barked. "I know you're all waiting to hear what those of us who first stepped foot on the new world discovered in the brief time we were ashore. We saw no signs of habitation. The sand hills here are similar to the downs in Holland, but better and wooded. We suspect there are miles of forests. We saw an abundance of oak and sassafras, pine and juniper. We saw birch and holly, some walnut and ash. Near the swamps are cedar and red maple." His dour face brightened. "Although we didn't find any good water, we dug into the earth. It's rich, black, and good for planting." A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. The first sight of the rocky coast had been less than promising. Rich, black earth meant abundant crops. Father laid an arm across John's shoulders. His eyes glistened. His thin, strong face glowed with hope, so strong it settled deeply into John's heart. When father looked like this, surely nothing too bad could happen. I suppose it is too much to ask that any of you separatists will consent to be part of an exploring party until Monday, Standish said. A trace of a sneer twisted his face. Monday will be time enough. Governor John Carver quietly told him. Tomorrow will be given over to preaching, praise, and prayer, as is our custom. Monday we will begin our work. His lips twitched. My wife, Catherine, and the other women are eager to wash clothes. Did you find a place suitable for such a long postponed purpose? Yes, there is a small pond not far away. The water isn't good for drinking, but it will serve well for washing. Good. While the women and girls are scrubbing the stink of the voyage from our clothing, we men will separate into groups. Governor Carver looked over their number. I suggest that those who are too sick to be among the exploring party use the time searching for food. I agree. Captain Standish took charge once more. Smith, he said, looking at father, if you consent to go with me, bring your son. He may prove useful if he can live up to his boasting as to speed. Loud laughter came from the group of people. Then several men stepped forward to volunteer, father among them. John clutched at his father's rough coat. Please, may I go? He held his breath and clenched his free hand until the nails bit into his sweaty palm. Father looked over him, much as Miles Standish had done earlier. This second inspection made John feel he'd been measured inside as well as out. I see no reason why not, especially as Captain Standish has requested it. A twinkle lurked in his eyes, but his mouth stayed solemn. How is it that he knows so much of your running skills? And what is this about boasting? John felt his face turn dark red from embarrassment. I didn't know whether he knew I could run fast, so I told him. I didn't think it was wrong to do so when God has given me long legs that have learned to travel swiftly. I see. Father folded his arms across his chest and grinned. In that moment, his expression was almost identical to John's. Father beckoned to Mother and Sarah, who came at once. Well, shall we let the son of ours go? Perfect trust showed in Mother's eyes. So long as he promises to stay close beside you, she agreed. Before John could holler with delight, Sarah asked, Why must you go? There are plenty of men. I know you're almost a man, but you don't know how to fire a musket. What would happen if you crossed paths with a bear or a wolf? What good would you be in a scouting party? Captain Standish thinks I'm man enough to go. I am, Sarah Smith. Oh, what's the use? You're a girl, and girls are always afraid. John knew he was being unfair when he said it, but he couldn't chance having Father change his mind. That's enough, John. Father's smile vanished. Your mother was a girl herself not long ago, and I don't know any man braver than she. Did you not see how she cared for the sick and weathered the hardest storms of the Atlantic without a word of complaint? Father's hand lightly touched Mother's shoulder, then came to rest on Sarah's head. This one is just like her. There is no fear for herself and your sister, only for you, and with just cause. In the past, you have been careless and fallen into trouble. Sarah has truly been her brother's keeper. It is well for you to remember this and show her more respect. Father's stinging criticism made John feel ashamed and guilty. 100 times Sarah had kept silent about things he did that would upset Father and Mother. I'm sorry, he said. Forgive me? Inspiration struck him. If I find any curious or pretty things ashore, I will fill my pockets for you. Sarah rewarded him with a smile. Thank you, but be careful, please. I will, John added with a sigh. I only wish we could go tomorrow and not have to wait until Sunday. Explore on the Sabbath? Sarah's eyes opened. You sound like a heathen. She proudly raised her chin. Elder Brewster says we must always set a good example for the crew, the London strangers, and the Indians. What kind of example would it be to have you go tearing off on the Lord's Day? She is right, Mother put in. It is God's own commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and resteth the seventh day. Mother, why did God need to rest? Sarah asked, her forehead wrinkled. I wouldn't think God would ever get tired. I have always felt God set aside the time to simply appreciate and enjoy all the beautiful things he created, Mother said. A little smile played about her lips. He also set an example for us. So did Jesus, setting aside one day out of every 7 to remember him and spend time being glad for all he has given us is not too much to ask, is it? No, Mother. John squirmed, thinking of the endless services they held each week. Many times in Holland, he and Sarah had envied the Dutch children, especially on Sunday. The Dutch boys and girls laughed and sang and played games just outside the church door. The deaconess who sat with the separate children in a special section watched them with a sharp eye. A few times, Sarah and John had forgotten the strict rules against talking and laughing. The deaconess promptly boxed their ears. One time, she whipped John with a birch rod. When they weren't listening to sermons or singing hymns on Sundays, John and Sarah would expected to sit quietly. I don't understand how it can be wrong to be joyful, John had complained to Sarah more than once. God must have been happy when he finished his world. Now John secretly sighed. He loved God. Yet how could he live through another long Sunday knowing that on Monday he'd step onto the shores of the new world, land of freedom? That is the end of chapter 1.